Welcome to AI and the Novel. This is the second in our public series from the Digital Theory Lab this year. Thanks to the Remark Institute for hosting us and to the OSF for funding us. We're here to discuss two of the first AI novels with two of the first AI novelists, so to speak. Hannes Bajohr, to my right here, is assistant professor of German at Berkeley. He's one of the world's leading experts on the thought of Hans Blumenberg. He's also a digital poet and now a digital novelist as of this year. Yeah. He has composed this novel, Berlin, Miami, in parentheses, which is out with Rohstoff now and is going to be translated, I just heard, which is great. Stephen Marche, whose name does not appear on the cover of this novella, sorry, I should say novella, is a reformed academic who became a real writer some years ago, and recently
under duress.
Yeah, probably is best known for now, I think, the next Civil War dispatches from the American future. Has written, you've probably read his writing recently, The End of the College Essay in The Atlantic, just after ChatGPT was released. A really super interesting investigative piece about the origins of the attention mechanism for the New Yorker, right? Yeah.
Yep.
New Yorker earlier this year. But today we're thinking about something else, which is a novella that he co-authored with pseudo-write, and well, I'm going to let you talk about the process, Stephen, but Death of an Author by Aidan Marcin. So really different projects here. I just want to say, before turning it over to let them talk about these projects a little bit individually, that one is a murder mystery intentionally in the style of Raymond Chandler, with some sort of like tech elements involved in the novel and some high-flying literary theory worked into the whodunit. The other is an experimental novel in a style that, according to the afterword of the author, is not really readable. Is that fair? Yeah. Or not really to be read. Yeah, conventionally readable. So really at the opposite ends of the spectrum in a certain way, in terms of like what it would mean to produce fiction, using these new chatbots that are basically everywhere now. That's all I wanted to do in terms of setting it up. Stephen, I was going to ask if you would start and talk to us a little bit about your project, and then
Sure.
And then we'll hand it over to Hannes, and then I'll have some questions, and then we'll go.
Do you want the 5-minute version or the 10-minute version or the 15-minute version? 5 minutes, right? Everyone wants the shortest version. I shouldn't have even asked. I mean, it goes without
10
saying.
is good. Do 10.
No. I'll do 5. It's much better for everyone. Well, I began, I began, like, I'll talk about how I got into this process, which is that in 2012, I wrote an essay for the LA Review of Books called "Against the Digital Humanities," and it was against the distance reading movement, and it was the kind of thing that gets cited in academic conferences a lot, to just say, I've read this, but I'm about to ignore it. And so because of the popularity of that piece, various digital humanists would keep sending me things that would say, well, you're generally right about distant reading, but this is really cool. And it was actually a great thing for me, because I would get access to the really cool stuff that was coming down the pipe sort of before it happened. And one of them was generative linguistic models. And this was before the Transformer, which was the architecture that was designed in 2017 at Google, and the paper was called "Attention is All You Need," and that's the real beginning of what we think of as the chatbots that we understand in artificial intelligence, but linguistic artificial intelligence that's really generative as we know it. But even before then, for Wired, I worked with a computer scientist and a digital humanist at the University of Toronto, where a lot of this stuff was percolating. I mean, Jeff Hinton walks his dog in my park, and I sort of met these guys early while they were happening. It was sort of happening in Toronto, and for Wired, I wrote an algorithmically generated story in 2017 before the Transformer, and that was sort of like building soapbox derby racer. Like, it was like the computer scientist had to build it for me, and it was, and whereas the Transformer based models that we have now are sort of like nuclear submarines. It was very, very crude, but I was able to write an algorithmically generated short story in 2017. And then as it kept developing, I kept using it. I think I'm the first person to publish a story with generative AI. I wrote a horror story for the LA Review of Books, and I wrote a science fiction story for MIT Tech Review that both used early, like, GPT 2.5 and GPT 3.5. And then, because I'd written those things, I got sort of early access to the big leap models like GPT 3.5 and GPT 4, which were just so qualitatively different than other models. And because I'd done that, the people at Pushkin called me and said, "Do you want to write a novel using artificial intelligence?" I said, "Will you pay?" They said, "Yes." I said, "I'm your man. Let's do it." And so I built this. I mean, that point, I'd already done, lots of experiments with artificial intelligence, and it was before ChatGPT launched that I'd done all of them. So I sort of knew not only how special ChatGPT was, but also the limits of AI that I'd already seen, and which ChatGPT just really covers over. It doesn't solve. It just hides. And so that gave me a sort of creative leg up. Essentially, they're built on 300 to 500 word sections with very elaborate prompts. They are. I used ChatGPT. I used ChatGPT, and then I used a program called Pseudowrite, which I knew the founders pretty well, and they gave me access to other models, and then we could put in, and then that really is like, make it sound like you had a button which was like, make this sound like Hemingway, make it sound like whoever you want. And I used that a lot, but then I also had access to Cohere. Cohere is a Canadian large language model company. The CEO is a guy named Nick Frost, who's a very unusual man. He's like 32 years old right now, but then he was like 25. He owns this large language model company. He's the CEO of this large language model company, but he's also the lead singer of a band called Good Kid Band, which is a very widely popular band that tours over the US and Britain and Europe and everywhere else. And he's just a very creative, cool guy. And we did a few projects together for the New York Times about Shakespeare and things of this nature. And then, but he gave me access to the inner workings of a model, which is pretty much a creative. I mean, it's just so fascinating to be able to actually, look at the randomness button on a large language model and alter it in ways that you want. And so from that, it was too expensive in time to build that into the whole novel. But like Chandler, and he'll have pretty muscular, pretty regular prose going, and then he'll just have these crazy lines in them. Like, you'll have like a line that was like, "It was a blonde to make a bishop kick a hole through a stained glass window." Right? It'll just come out of it just kind of they kind of come out of nowhere, but they're just so great, these lines. And so I used Cohere to write about 20 of those lines in it, using, like, training it on massive quantities of data to produce a single line. And that was another. So it was a multi-model approach to building the novel. And then I published it, and then I discovered that absolutely nobody wants to read anything that's written in AI. And even when it's massively publicized and gets profiles in the New York Times and everything like that, there's a real kind of revulsion towards AI generated work that I find actually pretty fascinating in its own right. So that's the story of Death of an Author. That's how it came to be. I think I was around 5 minutes there.
That's fantastic, Stephen. Thank you. And
Right.
okay, but I want to say, can I add one thing? Is that okay?
Sure, please. Yeah.
To be honest, which is Death of an Author is a whodunit. It's
Yeah.
it is written in the style of Raymond Chandler. There's a line in the afterword where you say, uh, you can't say to an AI system, write me a novel in the style of Raymond Chandler, and then you get one. And you say, and it's one of my favorite things in the whole book is that you say, the reason for that, Stephen, think, is that Raymond Chandler did not try to write in the style of Raymond Chandler, right? So
Yeah,
there's something I think very interesting about that. The novel is written by this, at the level of the sentence is
yeah.
like 95% by these tools.
Yeah, I mean, it's really all. I mean,
There's
I
there's
said it's 95% just
yeah.
so that when I changed like he to she,
Yeah.
or he, when the name to he or something like that in paragraph transitions, that
Yeah.
I didn't have to get the whole thing to recompose. It just seemed too silly to do that. But
And there's some
really, it's all AI generated. I didn't write anything, right? Like I just changed little bits so that I didn't have to go back and read to make it all fit together. But
yeah.
like it's not like there's no sentence that I wrote,
Right.
if you
But what
will.
I want to
Yeah.
highlight here is that, but it's your plot.
Yes. I mean, when I was working on like pseudo write, they and the earlier even the one I did with Wired, you know, getting models to create plots. I don't know if it's still true. It certainly seems to me true. They're terrible at them, right? They produce really hackneyed plots that don't have a lot of purchase to them. I mean, it fits with Morovich's paradox. Like Morovich's paradox is about AI is that the more sophisticated a task, the better AI is at it. So, like running the Tokyo traffic system, AI is superb at finding telling you what a cow is very hard to get AI to do that, right? And so I find in literary terms, it's actually that's very right in the sense that if you were to ask it to do something like what James Joyce did in Ulysses, like write this in the style of advertising copy and and make it incredibly dense, it could probably do that to a very high degree of power. Write a meaningful fairy tale that everyone wants to hear. No, it's not. I mean, it can write you something in the style of a fairy tale, but when you hear the plot of that fairy tale, you'll just be like, well, that's not, that's not actually powerful the way that like Little Red Riding Hood is, right? And so, yeah, I mean, I took extremely specific and detailed prompts. I mean, as anyone who does any kind of prompt engineering knows, like the strength of your prompt is the strength of what comes out, right? So it was certainly the lexical and syntactical structures were quite clear. Paragraph variability, sentence variability, Saxonate language as opposed to Latinate language moved with blended with them. I mean, a lot of that was cut and paste you could do for everyone, but the prompts were quite intense. And then plus, you can take it and then just put it in pseudo write and say cut this in half. And then that just like with human writing, like whenever you cut something in half, it always gets better, right? Like that's just one of the rules of writing. So I did all of those sorts of things, but yeah, it's a highly conscious work. Like it's not an efficient, this was not a drive towards like I'll make writing novels efficient. It was not an
Mhm.
efficient process.
Mhm. Okay, so the contrast here, I think, is to this other novel that Hannes has produced. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So first of all, thanks. It's great to be in conversation with you. I think we have kind of almost the opposite approaches to this. So
Fabulous.
my background is in well, I do what you could call computational literature. I've been trying to make poetry for the most part with computers for about 15 years. So with Python programs, but also with really early language models like even just Markov chains or RNNs, which were kind of the thing around 2015. And this book is the first attempt to produce something that is actually narrative. Because as you say correctly in your afterword, computers or the machinery that we can use to produce text is excellent at producing something that is like lyric, that is poetry, that is uh, uh, interesting on the on the unit of the line or of a couple of lines, but exactly the big story arch, the plot, is something that is quite bad. So what I wanted to do is not to produce a novel that is good in the sense that it has an interesting plot, which is what you were trying to do, but rather to figure out what the narrative capabilities are of AI models by letting it do its thing. So, and I did this by using a model that is about, I would say, GPT-3, 3.5 size, that is an open model where you know what the data set is. I think that was important because we have all these discussions about the opaqueness, opacity of the data sets that go into training, particularly the large models like ChatGPT and so on. There was a model by Eleuther AI called GPT-J and GPT-Neo-X. And then I did an extra step. I fine-tuned it. That is, I took 4 contemporary German novels. I should say the book is in German, so it will be come out in translated by a human next year with MIT Press. But it was trained on 4 contemporary German novels that all had something to do with digitality, like a very close future. And based on that fine-tuned model that had kind of the combined voice of those 4 novels, I had it write the text. And I played around with this first without wanting to do anything serious with it, but I did like the output because it was a strange eeriness. It was a strange uncanniness, not just on the level of inventiveness when it comes to words and characters, right? Since it is kind of almost a combinatorial principle behind large language models. They're very good at neologisms. Comes up with new words that make sense based on the way that words are usually built in that language. And German is actually quite good at producing new words, as you might know. But there was also an eeriness or a strangeness to the way it tried to narrate, because it was not that it was non-narrative, but it was also not a proper narrative as one might expect from a conventional novel. And this was kind of the idea or the first motivation to do a whole text with it. So very quickly to say how I did this, I did not use a dialogical process. This model was not one that was implemented in a chatbot like ChatGPT would be, but it was simply sentence completion. It was, if you may remember, before ChatGPT, we had GPT-3, where you had a text box, you could type in a sentence and then press generate and would complete based on what you had put in the next sentence. And this is basically how the whole novel was produced. There were a couple of technical constraints that made the length of the chapters around 2,500 world tokens, so not quite words, so they're relatively short. And whenever you try to build a new or write a next chapter, you have to start, as it were, at 0, right? It has forgotten everything it has written before. So I did not interfere very much. I sometimes, as it were, reminded it of what it had written before. And sometimes there was something that it had come up with that I got interested and wanted to know more about. For instance, so it's very hard to summarize the plot. It is generally something slightly dystopic, something that is set both in Berlin and Miami, which are the 2 cities in which 2 of each of those 4 novels are set. But it comes up, for instance, with a strange creature called the Kieferling, which would translate as the jawling. It has something to do with a human jaw, that is not quite described as a subject, but something in between. It has agency, but it's also some kind of talisman. It's very hard to describe what this is. And I found this thing just very interesting, and I prompted, as it were, the model to say more about it. And of course, this is a metaphorical way of. I mean, I don't think that there's any kind of subjectivity in that model. But this was basically what I did. I asked it, continue what you wrote before and tell me more about that thing. For instance, at one point it says the jawling is pregnant. And I asked, well, tell me about jawling pregnancies. And it comes up with a whole very Cronenbergian body horror chapter about what it is like for the jawling to give birth. And I found that just super fascinating, interesting. But I think the question that I asked is, what does a narration look like from a model that just based on its technical makeup cannot really narrate? And I was also playing off a little bit of this text by Angus Fletcher, a literary scholar, who writes that he made this case very early, and he probably has to, at this point, take back some of it. He said that AI cannot, in principle, narrate because it is, as a statistical machine, based on correlations, thus not of causation. Causation is a function of narrative, hence it cannot narrate. It's an argument from principle. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to check that by producing something to see if that actually holds. And I think what I came out of this with is, well, again, it's not narrative in any kind of conventional sense, but it's not non-narrative either. And I've read this book several times now. And each time I somehow find new things that are interesting and funny, and I do have, as it were, a mental model of what that narrative is, which only maybe confirms the idea that readership is at least as important as authorship in the kind of circulation of literature. But I think another thing, and then I'll stop, is since I'm also a scholar of AI and writing, as it were, I produced my own research subject or object. And because I know how I did it, I can kind of look at it and ask it questions. So one question one can ask is, what is narrative? What is narration? By looking at what the limits are of the object that produced it. But also I exactly know where I changed something or I didn't, which is something that I don't know with any other text. And I think this is something maybe we can talk about too. Any text that you encounter today might have some elements of AI, non-manual typing, as it were, in it. Mm. But since all text is surface for those who read them, we can never know, right? So that is also something we might want to talk about, because of course no one wants to market a book that is AI written unless it's kind of a gimmick. And I think the way that people reacted to my book was a bit like that. They said, here's the first German language novel written by an AI. And no one actually in the reviews read the book itself. They only talked about how it was made. There was kind of the novelty factor. But as soon as you don't say that, you don't know if the next, I don't know, novel by whomever maybe is already produced with some element of AI writing. And I think,
well, that Japanese woman won the Rio, what is it called, the Ryogoki Prize, the main prize, the main literary prize in Japan, and it was 5% AI written, right?
5%?
Yeah.
5%.
I think it was there was an AI character, and the utterances of that AI came from ChatGPT.
Well, there was, can I ask a question just to follow up to connect the two things? I have a question because Hannes, you were interviewed about this novel, and you said that as you were producing it, that you in some ways felt like, rather than the author, you felt like the first reader of the book.
Yes.
Right.
And I was wondering, Stephen, what was your experience like watching the sentences come out? Or what did it feel more like because it feels like I find this very interesting because you're the author. As far as the death of an author is, you're the author, but you chose to put, a pseudonym on that book, Aidan Marche, right?
Well,
whereas
various publishers
you put your name on it. So I think there's something interesting about that. So I'm kind of curious, like, what did it feel like to read that as it was sort of being spit out of pseudo-write and these other things?
Funny. I mean, I think mine was in a sense less experimental, right? Like I was looking, I mean, obviously it was an experiment and it was a gimmick, but I wanted to hold it. I wanted to hold it to human standards, right? I wanted to see if and that's why I wrote a whodunit, right? Like the crudest, like the most basic form of narrative, right? Like that has to hold people's attention. I was really trying. I felt like I wanted to master the technology, rather than reveal it, I wanted to control it in a very direct way, and so what I produced was what I intended, right? And getting to the point of it, this is what I intended is what I wanted it to be, right? That said, You know, there especially with the Cohere stuff, where it was generating, you know, sometimes it would generate 200 sentences, and I would pick my favorite, right? Like it was. I felt maybe only at like 20 times did I feel like I was pushing up against some kind of other force, right? And those, of course, are the most important moments of the work, right? Like where it's less what I'm doing than what is there in some kind of artificial intelligence residue or echo. I mean, he had he. Why would I say it's he? It had some. It had this line where it said. She walked away like an album going back into its sleeve. And I actually think about that line all the time. Like I think about it all the time. Because I would never have written that, right? And I don't know anyone who would, but I love it. And like I think it's an incredibly cool line
Do
to
you
have
remember,
written, but
do
I
you
certainly didn't
remember,
write it, you
do
know.
you remember what the prompt was that got you that line? Or
No, that was one of the Cohere ones where it was like it was trained on like um lines about women walking away, right? Like take 200 examples of lines about women, of great lines from novels about women walking away, train it into a model, and then get to fool around with the actual architecture of the language model and see what comes out,
so
right?
just
So that's a very distinct artistic practice than writing the chat GPT stuff, right?
just to
Like,
contrast it, like Hannah speaks of a prompt that's just open quotation marks.
Yes, right.
wow.
The opposite of that would be because it's simply completing what it was given. I very often just
Yeah.
and then obviously because it is fine-tuned on novels, you get a dialogue. But
It's funny, we're coming at it the exact opposite directions, but towards the same thing, right? Towards like, what can this actually do? Right. I'm trying to see what it can do when it's like when I'm absolutely riding it, right? Like when I've absolutely like saddled it up and put the bridle in its mouth and tried to control it as much as possible. Where does it kick? Whereas you're kind of coming at it like when it goes, where does it go? But I mean, I think, but it's funny how we come to the same conclusions. Narration is exactly its wild point. So that's the inflection that you're getting at. Is where's the inflection at? Although characters are really another really interesting approach that you get with AI. I think. I mean, like it has very different ways of handling voice that's a real potential creative place to reside in AI. I think is it. Well, I mean, I guess that's what chatbots are like. When you go and talk to a Kanye West chatbot, that's what it's doing. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting that we came at it from different approaches, but kind of towards the same thing.
there's in Berlin, Miami, there is also an AI that writes novels, and I did not
Right.
do that.
Yeah.
It might be something like that in one of the novels that was a data set for that fine tuning, but I don't know. There seems to be something about this that it wants to get at. I mean, I'm of course again not to subjectivize. I just wanted to add something about the question of authorship. And you said I did say I was the first reader simply because I was sitting there and saw it right? And then you can decide in which direction you want to go. You want to let it do. You want to ask something. So there is kind of this slightly interactive element in the act of letting write. At the same time, and I have tried to compare this to the experience of writing here. I never experienced it as an agent, right? It is
No.
a tool and an agent, and my metaphor was always it's somewhere between surfing and horseback riding, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is not is more than a tool because it's part of your body, and a horse is not just a hammer. There is something
Right.
between. But I've always considered myself the author of it simply because I come from a certain way of as it were programming as literature, right?
Did you ever go through a period of doing surrealist games? If you did, then this is going to be really eerie. But did you ever play like The Beautiful Corpse and games like that? Like where
Class that does exactly try to get the surrealism in conversation with these early novels.
right. Yeah. I think that's the clearest artistic tradition that this belongs to, right? Both of these works, right? Like it belongs to some kind of how to describe it. Like, I mean, they're trying to access the unconscious. We're trying to access whatever the hell the black box of artificial intelligence is, right? And how we move with that is going to, like, moving with it is the artistic practice. But a surrealist writing an automatic poem or found poem, that's not the same as like a Shakespeare sonnet of control. It's some other kind of creative practice, and some other relationship with language, really.
I, can I just
Please,
I'm
please
trying to
interject.
fill people in as we go a little bit without spoiling too much, but like, Stephen, your novel has or novella has a literary scholar kind of getting pulled into this like murder plot, right?
Yeah.
That which allows you to
I mean, those are the kind of books I like professors get involved.
okay.
You know what I mean? Those are the ones I actually read on the summer. You know what I mean? Yeah.
It's like a Big Lebowski,
Yeah, a bit.
for like a literary scholar, like somebody who just kind of gets carried into this murder plot that has like some, pseudo Elon Musk characters and stuff like that. And then
Well, and Margaret Atwood is murdered, and I have to solve her murder. I mean, I'm in Toronto. Like,
that's
it's I mean,
okay.
it's like right.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Except Margaret Atwood and Elon Musk are friends. Okay, like okay.
Do you know how you get a computer to imitate Margaret Atwood?
How?
You say, "Write this like Sylvia Plath imitating Philip Roth."
Oh.
Isn't that amazing? That's how you get. That's how you get. That's how you get a computer to write in the voice of Margaret Atwood. Anyway, so, an aside.
Your novel, like you just mentioned the most uncanny part of it, this jawling, right? The Kieferling.
Right.
But it has kind of also these features of, like I was saying to you earlier, like Vienna avant-garde, kind of like, there's a hangout element. There's this dystopian thing called The Difference, which has happened, which is really unclear exactly what that is, but something has happened. There's some sort of pandemic going on, I think. Is that right?
They're the life
Or there's some
viruses.
sort of viruses that
Yeah.
are being passed around. It's really hard to follow any kind of coherent plot in it. So I think, like, I've taught your novel, Stephen, because what it shows my students is how to pay attention to language at the level of tokens.
Right.
I tell them how you made it, and then I say, now read this and think about the sentences, right?
Right.
I think it would, in a weird way, your novel, Hannes, as like created in the way that is like you're sort of looking for stuff at the sentence level, but you end up exploring plot in this way that, right, as you say, is between causation and correlation. I think, both traditions that you seem to look back to are around from, around the same moment. Like you have those hard-boiled whodunit fiction classics, but you also have some kind of precedent for a novel that doesn't exactly have a plot.
Yes, absolutely.
Right? Like a novel,
which is surrealism, right? I mean, that's
I think it's true. There's like surrealism with the magnetic fields by Breton and Soupeau, but there's also
right.
And I think the Nouveau Roman trying to Rob Grier, trying to subvert expectations of coherence exactly in that way. I think there is precedent for that, and I think to make a further point, we are probably still at a moment where people try to connect what is done with this type of machinery in literary terms with a certain past, right? That's why a lot of digital writing very often uses clearly canonical literature as its input. The NaNoGenMo, the National Novel Generation Month that is going on for about 10 years, very often uses Emily Dickinson or Moby Dick as input because it is kind of marked as literary. And I'm very interested in what will happen with this, which is why I don't know if you saw this, but GPT-5, before it came out, was advertised by Sam Altman as being good at creative writing.
Yeah.
And it gave a really inane example of the output. And I think that's not what I'm interested in. I want to know what else is possible with that.
Well, he asked it to write autofiction.
Meta-reflective.
Yeah.
So yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
kind of thing where I think it talks about stochastic gradient descent
Yeah,
in terms of mourning a dead loved one or something like that.
That's the great irony, is that the best models for creative writing are definitely GPT 3.5, maybe GPT 4, maybe. But like the safer, I mean, the really horrible thing is I may end up using Grok on the next one because it has no safety parameters, and you can do whatever the hell you want with it, right? But like the bigger OpenAI gets, the more safety. Like naturally, it's tending towards safety because guess what? Lots of people are killing themselves by talking to these machines, right? So like it's that's the creative aspect of this has actually probably been diminishing for 2 years, really. I think so anyway. I don't know about you.
Let me ask one more question to both of you before, and we'll open it up for questions. But I said at the beginning, these are the first AI novels in a certain way. I'm sure that's false, and someone will say whatever. But there's a really big way in which it's false, which is that genre fiction has been doing this for quite a while, right? Like if you go on Amazon, you can find there was a wonderful investigative report by The Verge almost 2 years ago now that was not quite, but
it was before ChatGPT.
But it was before
Yeah, it was
ChatGPT.
still
Yeah.
About people writing what is now being called romantasy, which is
Right.
and fiction that has become like,
Mhm.
that it usually involves like sex with magical creatures is I think the sort of calling card, right? But this is being generated in a way that I think resembles at least your process, Stephen, if definitely not yours, honestly. In some
Yeah.
right where like people are trying to, because they're trying to produce a 300-page novel every 6 weeks or so. So I don't know, what do you think about the
Yeah.
fiction versus fiction?
Well, I've seen them. So I've seen like the spec books for, like, a friend of mine wrote her PhD on a genre of romance that was white nurses in Africa. And she had like, there were like 800 of these published in the 80s. It was like a whole genre. It was like, and so she had like 800 of these books, but she also had the spec book for the romance novel. And, it's like longer than the novels themselves. And it's incredibly specific about every detail and every beat of every moment in, like, I mean, it's literally a paragraph by paragraph kind of description of how to do it. And I mean, I guess it's a matter of taste or whether that's an algorithm, right? But it's like it's so like it's a formula, and formulaic fiction has been around forever, right? And that is, and the formulas have gotten, I mean, certainly before, by the time word processing arrived, there were already formulas in place to manipulate that. But I mean, it's kind of like you, in one case you have a formula that's like a recipe essentially, and another you have a machine just doing the recipe. I mean, to me, there's very little difference in the output anyway. So like the results are not as distinct as you might think. But like I keep thinking, like, when there was all this debate about like AI generated screenplays, like when they were striking about that, John Wick 4 was in the movies, and I was like, historians are going to think this was written by AI. It wasn't. It was written by completely lazy screenwriters who are like literally at one point he fights his way up a staircase and then they knock him down to the bottom of the staircase and he has to fight his way up to the top again. I mean, like it could easily have been written by machine, right? So like when you I think like people are going to blame AI for formulaic writing. It's like, no, we were already there. Like we were already, like originality had already been squeezed out of every marketable narrative commodity long before AI showed up.
So maybe the lesson there would be that a lot of this actually does not happen at the level of technology, right? It happens at the level of
Yes,
expectations, or however you want to call it. There might be something between those. I mean, what I try to do is I try to have a poetics in which the text reflects the method of its production. But I understand that this is an incredibly niche thing. I mean, it's basically an experimental approach. There might be others we don't quite know yet, but in the spirit of capitalism and the increase of automation, something that exists already, namely cliched sequels, might be easier to produce. and that might also drown out what else is possible with this. I agree with you, by the way, that the kind of interesting moment is over. At least the interesting aesthetic moment is already in the past. That I would even say that GPT-2 might be the
Yeah.
I find interesting because it was so.
You think it's the peak? No, GPT 3.5, surely.
I like that you could fine tune it easily. Yeah, you might be right, but because there was enough coherence there. But what was interesting is how surprising it was very often. It was surprising in a very technical, mechanical way of originality that I liked. And the whole thing that happened after reinforcement learning with human feedback that basically
That's right.
limited the space of possibilities that how the sentence would be continued, made it more of a product, right? You want to sell it, shouldn't offend, shouldn't be too surprising, but it also made it kind of less interesting as an aesthetic object.
Yeah,
that's where I was. GPT-2 was for me so far the peak. Yeah, but I'm not one of.
Why don't we go back to delivering messages by pigeon's leaf? I mean, we can't go backwards.
Okay. Well, I thank you both, first of all, and I'd like to open it up and see if people have questions. Yes.
Yeah, this is a question for both of you. So I enjoyed the examples of how you talked about the prize, that you felt when, this entity, this, tool comes up with something that makes you laugh, for example. I'm curious, in the way you use your tools, what other emotions did you sort of feel? Right now in the chat interface, often GPT is sort of geared for engagement, right? And often that comes at the cost of manipulating, a person using it into thinking they're doing something better than they are, or in other strange ways. So I'm just curious, in the way that you use the tool, how did that come up at all? Did you put up any defenses, and did you think about this?
I mean, I can maybe say something about that laughter. I think laughter and humor is probably the most easily automated because, at least according to one theory, right, it's the appreciation of incongruence, and that is very easy to produce, especially with the early models. There's a whole genre of, especially in the non-general space, joke generators that don't work because what comes out is not a joke. So if you ask an early model to tell a joke, it will be absurdist, and maybe because of that funny. If you ask a current model, it will be mildly amusing. But the weirder it is, I think the funnier it is. And I find the novel Berlin Miami extremely funny. It is funny in individual sentences, in the kind of breaking of coherence. But there's also something else, and this is, I think, where it gets interesting. There are, as Steve mentioned, there are some actually very good lines, and those I can appreciate without that distance that humor produces. And then, because I know that is AI produced, I also observe myself as a reader of that. And there's, for instance, a Kieferling giving birth is, when I read it, a strangely moving passage, and I question myself why I find that moving. Right? Is it simply the physicality of the process that is described? What kind of effects is happening then? But I think these are the moments in which I find I am surprised by my own reaction to what is written.
Yeah, I mean, I have a sort of, the emotions of it's sort of odd. Like, I remember talking to a Go player who, like, these Go players are using AI. And sometimes they like to watch AI play Go against itself because it does moves that don't make any sense. He said it was like, but are better, right? They're just not human moves, right? And he said it's like watching an octopus play the cello, right? Like and so there was part of that for me where, like, but really what it was like riding like a horse, like the emotional relationship you have with a horse, like that you're riding. Like, it's not like I can share a joke with a horse, but on the other hand, I did feel oddly bound to this weird model that I'd built this book with. And when I left it, it was weird. Like, it definitely felt like I had some kind of connection to it. Now, do creative things, like you're often with teams that you like. When you do an audio series, you go and work with 4 guys for very, very intense 6 months, and then you never see them again, right? And it was sort of like that with the model, where it's like I was with this model, we were building this thing, we had, and building something together is a great way to bond with people, right? Like maybe the best way. That's why people have like knitting clubs and stuff, right? That's why they would go to pottery classes on dates, right? Like so I had that kind of relationship with it. Like I feel like if you were to ask me what the model was like that I was working with, I could describe it the way somebody who owned a dog could describe the personality of that dog. Like it's not the same thing as it's like like I shared emotions with it or something like that. But it was something with which I was familiar. And it felt like it got familiar with me. I mean, there's a reason my mother has friends who, just talk to ChatGPT all day and go into these delusionary spirals and like ask them, and then end up asking, how should I what letter should I write to my transitioning grandson? And it tells them to write horrible things. Like there's a reason why people get caught up in these delusions with ChatGPT, and I felt that very intimately. Like the AI psychosis that people, although that's not really the right word for it, like when you're in this creative process, I feel like willing yourself into that. You know, that's a very complicated answer, but I hope I answered it.
Yeah, I guess I'm curious on, I suppose it's on two fronts. One is in this, I guess, potential or threat of AI psychosis, but also, as you had mentioned at the beginning, Stephen, that the reception, like public, like the book just didn't sell very well. And I'm
Yeah.
it's like a flip of Rocco's basilisk, where instead of like, do you help the AI knowing that it's going to kill you if you don't or whatever, it's like, do you, if you're interested in AI, like AI as a research object, to produce it on your own, do you produce an AI knowing that either other readers or authors or creatives are going to hate you, or that there's like a threat of this attachment sense that's going to happen and you might get AI psychosis and kill yourself, or there's class. Does that factor into your own thinking at all now? Because there's such a stink around AI, I think. But I'm also but
Well, it's more than I think about it. It totally has limited my possibilities in this front. Like I was doing AI experiments pretty regularly and publishing them between 2017 and 2023, 24. And the literary world, like if you tell people I wrote a novel with AI, I mean, that's like saying I'm on the Epstein list. Like it's like a very, like people are not happy with you when you do that, right? And in fact, I mean, the next project that I'm working on, which is a text box, that it was something I've been working on for a long time. I'm doing it with art galleries, because art galleries are actually much more open to AI experimentation than the literary world is inherently conservative. It always has been. I mean, it talks an avant-garde game. I mean, especially at this moment when, the standard novel that appears on a shelf is basically a 1950s style social novel, with boring characters and and it's just, people barely even mention phones in novels. I mean, it's so out of touch with contemporary technology and contemporary reality. They're just as they were with the internet, they're going to pretend this isn't happening, think it's all evil, never investigate what's possible in it, and just reject it wholesale. I like, and that effect, like there's two reasons for that. One is natural tendency of literary culture to reject everything new, but there is something about presenting a literary, when people know that something is AI. Like for example, I get letters from kid writers all the time asking me for advice and blah 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 blah. The ones that are coming in now are AI written, and I hate it. Absolutely hate it. It's like getting I mean, I wrote an article in the Atlantic about this. It's like getting microwave food. It's like instead of getting a grilled cheese sandwich where it's like burnt on both sides and the cheese is nicely melted, someone's taken two pieces of bread and put cheese in the middle and melted it in the microwave. It's disgusting. I mean, people eat that way, but I don't, right? And so I think, like, to me, like what me and Hannes are doing is fundamentally a bit like Nouvelle Cuisine in France in the 70s. They used the microwave a lot for very specific tasks, right? That was the origin of things like sous vide and really important culinary concepts that eventually spread everywhere. But microwave food, people just don't want it. And so, like, and that's why everyone is hiding their AI generation in standard literary works, because it is a signal. Like, you're not going to pay for a microwave dinner, right? Like, you're not going to go to a fancy restaurant. Oh, sir, we've microwaved your snail at your escargot today. Like, that's not going to fly. I really think I'm interested in exploring what AI can do that writing cannot do. I certainly would never use AI for any essay that I've written or anything that I publish in like the New York Times or things like this. I would never even consider it because I'm way smarter than AI. And I don't know why I would do something that I know is less smart than what I can produce, right? So on the one hand, I sympathize completely with people who reject AI work. I mean, I get it. I understand it. On the other hand, there seems to be incredibly exciting possibilities and incredibly exciting experiments to be made. Like Hannes, I mean, doesn't that sound an amazing book? Like, I want to get that thing. I want to see what this weird monster, this AI has come up with. Like, the experiments are very interesting, but they're also suppressed because of this kind of natural revulsion towards AI. So but literally, I can't do this work in the literary space anymore. No one will publish it.
I have a slightly different answer to this, partly because I'm, as it were, buffered from the usual literary scene, because I've always done conceptual experimental stuff. So I've always wrote a text and wrote about the text at the same time. I had about 7 years ago, I had a volume of poetry where each individual poem was produced by some computational method with a very short explanation on the bottom. And the idea is you have to read both in order to make sense of it, partly because poetry is already hermetic, right? And you can read a computer-generated poetry exactly like we could read some kind of poem from a modernist writer, but you read it differently if you know that it is produced in a certain way. It's kind of the Pierre Menard problem there. So this, in a way, was not so much a problem to me, but I now notice that there are two things happening. On the one hand, there is exactly that talk of rehumanization, that there is some kind of human touch to authentically organic literature, as it were, that is not the same as AI written literature. And in the other space, in the experimental writing, people who have done a lot of work with digital computational writing suddenly become a little bit bored because everyone else is also doing that, right? And because there are these lineages that explain what you do. If you stand in an experimental lineage, you have a different relationship to this than someone who wants to write like Margaret Atwood. Or there is something about the context, I think, that shifts. I was never worried about Rocco's Basilisk or something like that. And maybe one more point I wanted to make about the idea of writing about technology. I think there are two ways of doing that. One is to make it on a level of content, and the other to do it crudely on the level of form. And I'm interested in the level of form, so that by reading the text, you don't get a description of the technology, but you get an exposition. You are shown what the outcome of the technology is. Brecht at some point talks about inhaltismus, contentism. And the opposite of that would be some kind of formal approach. And I like that, because then you can actually play with the machine at a certain distance level by simply observing what it produces. And you always remain in the driver's seat. And you remain in the driver's seat, not, I don't think, because I'm a better writer without it, but because I'm the last instance in the circulation of the text that can be declared done. So I would say that this is a purely social act that no machine so far can produce, unless it is some kind of deceit, right? Unless you don't say it. But that's not what I'm interested in, partly because of that poetics. So I would say I'm the only one who can make this, because I'm the only one who can declare it to be made in the context in which it is made as a piece of experimental work.
I do think, if I can just add something for the conversation's sake, that this tendency, you were saying you have to go to galleries, right, Stephen?
Yeah.
Yeah. There is like a huge precedent in both the visual arts and also in music.
Yeah, absolutely.
For, I mean, nobody says like, how dare you make music with a synthesizer, right?
Right.
You know, and nobody is saying to Holly Herndon, how dare you make music with AI, right? Like, I mean,
a little bit. They are a little bit, right?
yeah,
Oh, the literary world,
in
man.
our debates, fine. Less so in the visual arts, I think, because of how much has been, how deep the precedent is. Yeah, sure. But it's such a blanket like taboo in
Oh yeah.
you're running into.
Well,
And
the literary world's it's
about-
inherently it's super conservative. I mean, it acts all lefty, but like when it comes to change, it hates it. It always has. That was true in the like other than a few experimental groups.
Early on, right after ChatGPT came out, I just throw it in and then sorry, I don't mean to interrupt the conversation, but with a colleague who's an art historian.
Yes.
And I said, and he said, Leaf, this changes everything. This ChatGPT changes everything. Everything is different now. And I said, well, I'm not going to say who this was, but I said, well, I mean, you know, there was like a similar kind of attitude when film came along, right?
Right.
He said like, oh, you know, like there were these Germans who were saying like, I can see Alaska for real, right? Without leaving in. And this is like a total shock and a change, right? And I said, like, don't you think that you're being a little bit, you know, naive by saying, you know, and again, art historian. And he said, Leaf, language is so much more fundamental than images are to what it means to be human.
Yeah, there isn't.
That stuck with me because I was like, well, I don't know, but
maybe. I mean, we're already starting to see like the limits of this technology emerge, right? Like,
can't artificialize this thing. Please don't. This can't. This is, you know, one bridge too far.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry.
Maybe, but I mean, I think the film analogy, like, film did change everything.
Yeah. That's
right. Like, but people are still people, right? Like, and I think this will change everything. But you know, on the other hand, like the need to feel art and the need to feel the human behind art will not change. I don't think it has changed. I mean, already you can see, like, you know, this was supposed to end art direction. Like if you see, there are ads made with AI, but like, you know, if you're producing a major campaign for a company, you might use AI as a gimmick, but then afterwards you're going to be using high HD images with excellent directors who can find meaningful images. It's not there's no solution to needing that human feeling, I would say, you know, and I don't think that's different in I just would like to, before we critique it, can we not find out what it is? Like, can we not like have some fun with it and figure out what it can do and what it can't do before we, you know, hate it? But you know, I think the literary world has always been quite conservative that way.
Yeah, I have a question specifically about, because I feel like when you're thinking about literature, you're thinking on multiple different levels, right? Leaf, you said, okay, it's writing on a level of sentences. That's like a novice poet, right? Like you, at 13, you write for the sentences. And then very quickly you realize that's not what poetry is about. And I guess having a voice is also something that's a lot deeper than kind of AI can get to. I was at a Doc NYC event watching a short, and it later revealed at the end of the short that it was generated, the narration is generated by AI. And the whole time I was like, this is a terrible film. Like, I feel bad for the filmmaker. Who made this? It's like it's a gimmick, right? And then I was like very much relieved. So having a voice is also something very different. But I'm curious about in terms of generating kind of generating plot. Where does the character go? Character development. There's something I feel like when you make it very open. I wonder if it's actually helpful. Because oftentimes, when you're writing fiction, you're trying to control the character, right? Like, and I think sometimes you have to resist that urge. You have to kind of like what Grace Paley would say, all of my characters have an open future. Like then that's
Right.
difficult to do. And at the same time, I was talking to another friend of mine who was like going through a divorce for half a year. She's like trying to figure out, is my marriage gonna end? Is this gonna last? And she eventually told me, all of the people I talked to, all the friends, psychiatrists and everybody, only ChatGPT and a Taoist monk told me that your marriage is not gonna last. And they were both right. And so to me, that there's something about
Don't divorce because of ChatGPT. I mean, my God. Anyway, sorry.
right? Like you want to tell your friend, oh, this will pass, that your marriage is going to sustain, right? Like there are all these different reasons that you want to control the future of a person, the future of a character. I wonder if you feel like ChatGPT or AI has a better shot at letting go of that.
Let me first quickly say something about the anthropological assumption that came up here, namely that there is such a thing as maybe some kind of standard that is bound to specific genres or media or ways of expression or however you want to call it, and that maybe language is one in which we are all competent, and hence there is less change. Right? That would be some of the argument. Already in the 50s, Brian Geisen and William Burroughs said writing is 50 years behind painting, and they brought in cut-up, right? And the idea that collage techniques that already the Dadaists have used, and yet it hasn't caught on in any meaningful way. And the argument there would be, well, we're narrative creatures on a very anthropological level. Narrative requires a certain structure of coherence. Breaking that coherence to a sufficiently large degree makes it impossible for people who are basically the same on this anthropological level to appreciate it. So that would be a model of anthropology in which humans relatively stay the same. There might be development, obviously there's development in literary history, but it is bounded. And the other idea would be, well, but there is so much that does change, right? And you talk about film. Film has this big impact on perceptual change, that we understand the world differently after film, the optical unconscious, and all these terms from Benjamin. And I always wonder about to what degree this is actually true when it comes to these comparisons. Is speech something different than seeing? Because seeing something is maybe more adaptable than making something that you see. Right? I think that the difference would be a passive capacity that we all have is more adaptable than the practice of communication and so on. And I say that because I feel like a certain idea of literature that starts with a standard in the middle has a more stable idea of anthropology, that one that starts, as it were, from the boundaries. So what starts from the boundaries would be an idea of literature that says, let's not define what literature is normatively by looking at what we have thought of as literature, but let's look at the possibilities that are out there at the long tail of literature. And that's, I think, more the avant-garde, the experimentalists, and so on. And depending from which way you look, I think you will have a different anthropological outlook. So I will not say what criteria of good writing are, because I think the criterion of good writing is not self-evident. It is something that has to be explained. We all have one. Text that is not commented is written according to some standardish assumption of what good writing is, but text that has a comment in a way that is already released from quotidian understanding of what writing is can be anything. And I would never say that something is not literature. And I would say that not even that something is bad literature, because maybe the standard for that have not been expressed properly for me to make sense of. But again, this is kind of the perspective from which one can look, from the center to the periphery, or the other way around. I think again, I think this is maybe where comparisons don't work anymore. I would say if you pretend that something follows a certain standard but fails, then obviously it is bad. But I could write a novel with ChatGPT by making that kind of the conceit, right? And there are novels that are willfully bad as that conceit. You can say, okay, I don't want to read this all the time, but no one ever said that this is what you will do, right?
Yeah.
So I'm just saying I'm more careful with these normative judgments of what literary quality.
Yeah, I mean, I find character. I was obviously working in a much more traditional mode here, so I was dealing with pretty much like E.M. Forster's definition of like two-dimensional characters and three-dimensional characters, right? And three-dimensional characters being like Grace Paley's great line about how they have to stay open. In a sense, those are the kind of the first, the proper characters that we see emerging really from, I mean, I would say from Shakespeare's soliloquies. I mean, I'm a little prejudiced because my PhD is in Shakespeare, but like when you start to have characters where you can see their thinking move, and also that movement of their thought is not graspable entirely, that's where you get this impression, this Trump loyal effect of literary effect of infinity, and that's what mimics, people, because people are fundamentally unfathomable, and when you read characters who are fundamentally unfathomable, that is the kind of mimetic understanding of human nature that literature gives us, right? But the thing that's very interesting about that when you're dealing with large language models is that large language models are themselves a black box, just like a great literary character, just like a person, right? Like we don't know how its internal mechanisms work. And when, I would say just on a strictly technical level of creating characters, when you're writing novels, character work is the most laborious part of the activity. It's very hard to figure out what people are thinking. You are in a space where you have to be both concise and intensely detailed at the same time. That's how you get really solid characters, and that's ultimately, I think, what causes readers to truly fall in love with work, is when you have characters that create that impression that's like people, right? I mean, a professor of mine, when I was a TA once for a first year literature course, said we have exactly one goal here, and that is to make some of these students understand that people in books are not real people, right? And that they're constructed, right? And so when you're dealing with large language models, they're incredibly useful in character work because they can just generate detail, right? And the unfathomability that they create is in them. And so that was definitely a part of Death of an Author. Is like, we'll just let the machine work out what the character is, because just simply by adding details, just by adding like wearing a yellow scarf as she steps out of a room, that changes what kind of person that is, right? And so I would just say that is probably, to me, the most interesting aspect of using LLMs creatively, is this question of closed characters, open characters, what the machine can do because it is open, right? Because it is generative, and that. I mean, I think that's why the natural tendency to use this technology is agentic, right? Is because that's what people want. They want someone to talk to. I mean, it's sort of sad, but that's what LLMs are basically used for.
Andrea.
Next. So right after ChatGPT was released, I gave a paper on hallucinations, and as someone who's always been interested in the philosophy of language, I was playing, just like many other colleagues, with Harry Frankfurt's idea of bullshit, right? Speech that is plausible, coherent, but also completely uninterested in truth, right? And had my paper stopped there, it would have been a really bad paper because lots of other people were doing that. The question that I was really trying to wrestle with as a literary scholar is that in my work, I do encounter speech that is coherent, plausible, but also completely made up on a daily basis, and that is in literature, of course, right? So the paper was a kind of a confused, very much work in progress way of thinking about language games in those true contexts. Where does bullshit actually produce unintended consequences? Where is bullshit something that is kind of embedded in the functioning of a piece of prose or poetry or literature in general? And so my question for you is really about the potentially productive use of hallucinations in your work. I suspect that the answers will differ since one of you is more interested in form, the other one in content. So how did you deal with the fact that these models that you were using can, of course, in part hallucinate? Was it productive? How did it become embedded in your writing process?
I would say that hallucination is the maybe what makes this a literary machine. Right? This would be kind of a simple answer, because hallucination only makes sense against what they call a ground truth. And the ground truth doesn't really matter when it comes to these things, unless you want, as you mentioned in your afterword, have this kind of heteroglossia that takes in elements from existing text, but also existing references to whatever historical events and so on. And that in reality effect could be that it's the actual event and not something that is made up. But I think in the literary space, this doesn't really matter too much. About bullshit, I mean, that's the one side is the facts and kind of some kind of correspondence to reality. The other one would be it is a problem as soon as hallucination is a dissimulation of intent. And I think this is where bullshit is maybe also a problematic term, because bullshit always assumes that there is an intent behind speech, right? It is one that does not care about whether it is true or not. But bullshitting really is only something that an agent can do that has some kind of intentional structure. At least that's how I understand the argument, quite frankly. So as soon as you use that term, you have to kind of make a choice whether you want to talk about intent in LLMs or not. And there are good reasons not to do that, but I think that was always my problem with that term.
Yeah, I mean, I find hallucination is the essence of AI. I mean, I interviewed everyone who invented the transformer, and the way that they knew that the transformer was a meaning machine is that somebody plucked into an interface, give me a Wikipedia entry of the transformer, and it gave them this hallucination about how it was a Japanese hard rock metal band, right? And that's how they knew that they had a meaning machine, is that it could create hallucinations. I mean, I do think it's fascinating that we're living in the era of hallucinations. I mean, so was it you, Lee, who was telling me? It was somebody who goes to all the AI conference. He was like, wherever there's an AI conference, there's a psilocybin conference next door. Like, there's always like a mushroom sales group, like right by the AI conference. They seem to go together. And of course, the news, it just seems like a permanent hallucination too. I mean, I think the nature of art from its very beginning, and I think we are entering a period of primitive magic with AI, is controlled hallucination, right? I think that's where we're going, and that's what meaningful AI art is. I mean, the thing I'm making in Sweden is kind of that's what it is. It's a controlled hallucination. But yeah, like I think the only reason that it's meaningful is that look, we start in hallucination and then we temper it to get to meaning. But the hallucination comes first, and that's kind of always been true of human beings. Like, before we were human, we were chanting in caves, right? Like, that's like people were looking for better places to do their shows before there were really people, right? So and I think we're returning to that era of, like, what is a hallucination, what is meaningful, how do we tell them apart? And I think art is the guide of that. Was it you who told me that, Leaf?
Oh, I don't think so. I think no.
Somebody who goes to a lot
They
of
are
these things told me that.
The
Yeah.
I was gonna ask, like, I think one of the reasons for the blowback that you were talking about before, like you're using, how dare you use,
Mhm.
maybe some more obvious ones. And I do think it's super interesting. You haven't experienced any, have you?
No, because
Yeah.
it is experimental.
Yeah, because it's experimental, right? You're allowed
Right.
to use this for experimental art. Maybe if you use it to produce a normal novel, in some
Well, no one gives advances for experimental art. I got an advance, right? And it's like, yeah, it didn't hurt out, buddy. Like they were very clear about that.
yeah,
You
yeah.
know?
But but I was thinking, like, one of the claims on the part of those critics is like, this isn't language. I mean, you were just talking, that's what this hallucination thing comes down to, right? Is that we keep hearing these terms, synthetic language, whatever, there's like, they keep coming up with them to deny, that this is human. I guess it's not human language, whatever. But I guess, how did you end up, what was the feeling coming away from these production processes vis-a-vis that question? Because there's this really intense desire on the part of AI critics to say this is cut off from the human thing.
Yeah.
Things do something fundamentally different. There's a clear division that for some reason no one can recognize and can't be quantified, and no one can actually predict it at any time, right? But except in trivial examples, right? But
Right.
so that, yeah.
I mean, for me, like, the New York Times reviewed it and he liked it. He liked it, but he didn't want to like it. Slate said it's much better than you would ever expect. But they were both kind of appalled at how readable it was, which is, kind of tells you they want to hate it before it comes in. I mean, I think anything that is sort of in between categories creates hatred, right? There's an amazing article by a social scientist called David Bloor called Polyhedra and the Abominations of Leviticus. And I mean, it's a bit about how mathematicians and the ancient Hebrews both had these categories of like things that don't fit, like things that have the wrong kind of hooves for how they are, and they're all hated, they're all excluded and marginalized. And I think AI art is exactly that thing. What is it? Is it human? Is it a product of a person? Is it art? Is it a product of a machine? Is creativity something a machine can do? They just it's just very, very in between a lot of things, in between a lot of fundamental categories, and that naturally produces rejection. And then I think also, like, it took a long time for people to get used to photography. I mean, really, like almost 80 years before it was treated as art, right? So I think I fully expected the rejection. I thought people would be a bit more curious. I thought, the greed and fear cycles would kind of ease off after a while, but no. I mean, the greed and fear cycles are pretty intense, and curiosity is nothing compared to fear and greed. I guess I've been learning that lesson my whole life, but this was definitely a lesson in that.
I like the idea of that it's between categories. My first impulse would be to say it's some kind of insults to a certain self-understanding. Right? Computers have solved everything that is rule-based, and now it's coming for things that is not rule-based. And Günther Anders had this idea of the Promethean shame, that is the shame of the maker in the face of the quality of the made, and that somehow there is some kind of insult there, and I think very often in the reviews that you described kind of match even with the ones that I got, where people were said, okay, good, this novel shows that AI is still bad. It's still not as
Right.
either. So, and that's why they were all kind of interested and friendly.
Thank God this book sucked. Oh, phew. Oh my God.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Also didn't read the book, frankly. No one read the book, everyone read the afterword. But I think that's literally something different than the question of what language, whether this is language or not. And I know you.
What did you feel?
I know that you invested in the answer, and you have one. And I think it comes down to, well, how do you define language, right? And I think as a play of signifiers, sorry, of pure science. That is perfectly in the realm of what language is. If you think that language is something that has a very strong pragmatic dimension, in which whether you even understand it as a part of a way of life in the Wittgensteinian sense, then probably isn't, or is not yet, or is not in a full sense. Something like that.
But
What I like, what I would
Yeah.
replace it with is the term writing. It is writing. It might not be language, but it is definitely writing. What else would it be?
Yeah. Although I mean, I don't know how things are in Germany, but like when I should have mentioned that comment about authors earlier. You can't copyright this work in North America. I'm not the owner of it. Right. I can't, which is a very bizarre thing, to be the creator of something, but not to possess it. Yeah.
But the reason wait, let me just put it one slightly one other way, which is just to say, like, when I finish writing something that I don't use AI to write, I think I do kind of feel like this is definitely language. I have created some language, you know? And that's my question, is like, did you feel like this was beyond language, something other than language? Did it alienate you from your sense of language, or did it pull, or did it work in the other direction, or did nothing like that happen? I get what you're saying about writing. It's definitely, of course, I think anyone should agree that it's definitely writing. Although
I think when you're making art, you're already doing not normal language, right? Like if you're making art, you're making language that you're hoping has some kind of trans-communicative function, whatever that might be, right? And so it is supposed to be like, I think controlled literary language is inherently transcendent of the use value of language, right? I don't know. How did you feel? I mean, I felt exactly the same as I felt for every other novel I'd written. I made something. Look, I hope people think it's cool. Like that's what I felt.
That's interesting. I mean, I did feel the same, but because I mostly do stuff like this, I write at a distance. If you write a text that writes a text, right? If you write a code that produces something, so that the difference wasn't that big. I think the
in fiction, in literature.
Yes, exactly. So the difference might be a genre-specific one. I don't use AI when I write the scholarly text, partly because I think.
So you say.
So I say. But my argument here would be that I don't have the feeling that I can express what I want to express. Although I am getting more interested in the idea of the reformulation that it can do. That you I think you in your afterword once talked about it, that it's like shuffling through sentences, right? And but it gives you a new sentence that is basically the same as the old one, but different. And I wonder,
well, that's my new work. That's in Sweden. It's an infinitely regenerative text, which I mean, to me, that's the future of this, is like playing around with what is really distinct about AI models, which is that they're infinite and they involve chance, right? Which is what the surrealists had, you know, and their experiments were involved in chance and infinity and the unconscious. And, you know, and I think AI can get there. I just think, you know, I mean, I hope this work gets at it, but like there's that to me is what's exciting about this technology and its artistic application, are those questions that are not really the same as other literary questions, right? I mean, you were saying, Leaf, it's like language, but like we're always trying to escape language too, right? I mean, it's like what's the Flaubert's line? Like, you know, language is something you want to make the stars weep, but it ends up being a drum that you beat to make a bear dance at a market. Like we're always trying to escape the limits of language, and I think maybe this tech offers us one way to do that.
Jonah, do you have a question? That'll be our last one, I think. So, do you want to unmute? There we go. There's Jonah.
Yeah, I had a question. So I think that there's, if we're talking about like a language model generated novel or something like that, it becomes a question of, is an AI generated novel a style of novel, or is it a different medium from literature fundamentally? It's not a novel, it's an AI generated output, which is in its own category. Because I think that informs the kind of criticism that we're able to do. If it's a style, then we can do the kind of Lukashian criticism of modernism or Jamesonian criticism of postmodernism, but some new iteration for whatever this is. But if it's a different medium, then I don't know that, the aesthetic analysis of literary style is of particular use to us. So I'm interested in how you're thinking about, did you write a novel, or is this some other kind of writing that we can't neatly fit into these categories of form that we're used to in literary study?
I would say it's a novel. It's a novel simply because it has to rely on precedent, and that precedent makes up the boundaries of interpreting it in some. You could argue, and there are people like Nick Montfort very often says he's not producing computational literature. He's using computers as a medium to produce art. So art might be the main thing, and it's not defined by the formal aspects, by the use of technology in the first place. I don't find that convincing, because that really requires you to ignore everything that you see, right? It has the shape of a novel, partly because also I trained it on novels, so maybe there's something there. But I don't know. I don't. Maybe I'm lacking the imagination to see it really from.
I have a pretty crazy answer to this one. But I'm going to give it anyway. I mean, I think eventually AI will be a medium. It will be. It's like film in the sense that what its artistic requirements are ultimately going to be is some kind of new narrative and new imagery and new lyricism that we don't know yet. Because even when people had cameras, like, for a long time, they're just doing like, here's a goldfish in a bowl, here's like a woman standing on her head. That was enough for a long time. And that's kind of where we are with AI. And I think work like mine and Hannes is essentially like the early films where they're cannibalizing earlier forms, where they're essentially trying to put on plays that they can then distribute to screens. But it kind of works both ways, because I was at Bayreuth this summer and I saw the Ring Cycle, Wagner's Ring Cycle at Bayreuth, where he designed the theater for this work. And when I went there, I was like, oh, this is a guy who was trying to invent films before there was film, because there's a double proscenium arch. The orchestra is under the stage, so the music comes out with the audience. It creates a flat impression. It's the first place that ever dimmed the lights on a theater, so that you have this sense of being overwhelmed by these images. Wagner was essentially trying to create film before film had come to exist. And I think we're in a similar space here, where the narrative hasn't caught up with the technology hasn't come up with the narrative. Eventually someone will come along and figure out what this medium is, and that person will be like a Walt Disney-like figure. They'll be capable of understanding capital. They'll be able to understand technology and art and marketplaces in a unified way. I so wish I was that person. I am just a person who wants to fool around with these early forms that are very much the misbegotten children of what will eventually come to be, right? So I think we're eventually going to get to a medium. But what I and Hannes have used this technology to do is essentially cannibalize an old form, the novel. I don't think there's going to be a massive market for AI generated novels. I think these will be seen as what they are, which is very interesting experiments on the way to a new art, right? And a new and a properly new art that has application. Like, when they saw film, there was a long gap before they figured out, well, you can fade out and you can splice, and if you put a guy's face beside a meal, it makes him look hungry. Like, they had to figure all that stuff out, and it took a long time, and it took a lot of brilliance to figure it out. And we're just fumbling in the earliest possible dark of this new medium towards new forms of expression. And I think we're all doing our bit, but like, it's not there yet. And it will be something that when it happens, none of us will recognize what it is, because we don't know what it is. So Death of an Author is a novel written by AI, much the same way that, like, you know, the film of a train going into a station was a film, but it's not. It's not the end point. It's actually a very, very early, crude version of what this artistic process is going to be.
I think we should leave it there. That was really fantastic. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Hannes. Thanks all for coming.